I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That's Philippians 4:13, or at least a paraphrase of it, and probably the most common version that a lot of cowboys and a lot from the ranch side as well in the industry can quote. It's one of the most commonly used verses in sports, and again, particularly, it shows up a lot in rodeo. But what I want to do is take that away from you, but then give you back something a whole lot more. On its own, the verse sounds fantastic because what it suggests to us, or the way we use it, is with the idea that I can do anything I set my mind to. If I'm a Christian and my heart's focused on Jesus, He's going to give me the strength I need to succeed. And so that's especially important in the rodeo industry and any of those sports, whether it's on the roping side, the time event side, or the rough stock side. Being able to access this idea that that Jesus will do whatever it is that we need him to do to give us the ability to succeed. Who wouldn't want to embrace that? And often we even see it in tattoos. The problem is that's not what the verse is telling us at all. We have to look at the rest of the verses that come before it to fully understand what it is that Paul is telling us in Philippians. So we go back to verse 10. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. That's from the NIV version of Philippians 4:13, but backing up all the way to verse 10. What we have to understand here is what Paul is saying before we get to Philippians 4:13. So this is where I'm taking that away from you. Paul is not saying that he can do whatever he sets his mind to because Jesus is going to give him the strength to do it. What he is saying is that Jesus is going to help him get through whatever circumstance he finds himself in. So as he's writing this letter back to the church at Philippi, he's actually in prison facing a very uncertain future, but he's thanking them for the help that they've sent him and then telling them, hey, I get it. I know how to be content when I have everything I need, but I also know how to be content when things aren't necessarily going my way and I need help. And so what we can take from this then is something much more powerful, much more significant to us than just Philippians 4:13 on its own. Now what we can see when we look at the full context of this verse is where our strength comes from. Jesus, yes, correct, absolutely. That is where our strength comes from. But that's not where our strength comes from just to succeed at what we set our minds to. Our strength comes from him to get through whatever it is that we're going through. And that's so much more important than just trying to win a bull riding and saying to ourselves, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, and repeating it kind of like a mantra. What this now gives us is an understanding that we can rely on Jesus to give us the strength to get through anything we're facing, that we need him. Even when things are going our way, we can't forget that we still need him, that he is our everything, that God is our everything. But when things are going difficult for us, that's where we can find our strength to be able to get through whatever hard times we're facing. So it can be something as simple, or well, I wouldn't even call that simple, to call a riding slump simple, but it can give us the ability to get through that we rely on him when we're injured out and we're getting frustrated. Then we can draw on strength to get through the rehabilitation, the patience we need. All of that we can draw on Christ for in order to be prepared for what comes next. And what comes next can still be something even more difficult. We forget that there's a lot of verses that remind us that we aren't promised a perfect life. And that's why we sometimes misuse that verse about, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. We take it into the context that we can succeed at anything we set our minds to, but we forget that what we're supposed to be doing is following God and what his plans are for us. And sometimes his plans can be for us to struggle for a time. And it would be very hard to find anyone listening to this that hasn't faced a really difficult struggle. So when we put the verse into its full context by looking at the rest of the verses around it, then we can see and be encouraged by this to know that whatever it is we're facing, that Jesus really, really will give us the strength to get through it. That's where strength comes from, not just for the things that we want, but the things that we need to go through. We can rely on Him to help us get through it because He will give us the strength to endure whatever it is that we're facing. So I truly am hoping that I've taken that away from you, but for the right reasons, for a good reason, that we don't misuse that verse anymore, but we actually see the full context because it gives us so much more. When we want to understand what biblical strength is, that's where our strength comes from Jesus Christ, for everything and anything that we face.